So you and I have talked a bit about this concept of actually, I think that we've been talking for like over a year at this point about why you need to come on the show when I was running my other podcast to
Mm-hmm.
talk about therapy
Mm-hmm.
as an essential tool for business owners. This is something that I believe in fully. And I think that like, in fact, I was just talking with a friend the other day about how I'm like, if you can only invest in one thing as a business owner, like if you feel like you are getting in your own way and you can only invest in one thing, make it a therapist because
Mm,
it's going to help you deal with like the things that are coming up in your business are not just coming up in your business, right?
yeah.
And one of the things that we talked about recently was that I feel like a lot of the programming that people find themselves in to help them with their businesses is actually kind of like a way to avoid having to do some of the deeper, harder stuff that comes up in therapy.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm wondering if like you would share some of your thoughts on that as I say that.
Yeah, I mean, I smile because I think you're right on. I think we do this in so many areas of our lives, right?
Mhm.
We often look for ways to kind of quasi deal with the issues. It's like, what can I do over here that
Yeah.
might kind of make this deeper thing feel better, without actually addressing the deeper thing? And the challenge that comes up, I think, around that is that we end up maybe investing in like I'll just use like self improvement as an example, investing in like 20 different self improvement courses
Uh-huh.
because we're not actually getting to the root thing that's there. I have this phrase that I learned kind of like the subtle aggression of self improvement. And it's like we just kind of keep looking for the thing to solve the deeper issue without going deep. Does
Yeah.
that make sense?
Oh, it sure does. I'm
Yeah.
like, oh, we're already here, huh? Like you know, yeah, I mean, I hear this and what comes to mind for me is this feeling that um if we could just do self-improvement the right way, then maybe all this stuff wouldn't feel so hard.
Mm,
Like that would be the answer to making things not feel hard if we could just figure out how to I don't know, like manage our mindset in just
yeah.
the right way and that might take the hard out of it. And what I have found to be true is that actually it's learning how to be with the hard stuff
Hmm.
that is really the that's ultimately going to be on your side. Like
Hmm.
eventually you're going to find yourself in a place where you're going to be like, oh, there's no escaping the fact that this shit is
Hmm.
hard.
Hmm.
Which is why
Hmm. Well, and Brooke, I think you're totally hitting on something really important. Like it's the learning to be with the hard stuff. And I think that's why we don't know how to be with the
yeah,
hard stuff. And so that's why we look to these other things to try to supplement and to try to like give us a way through without going through. And I think
right.
therapy, if you're able to find like the right therapist for you, that you're able to learn that skill of being with yourself in the difficulty, whatever
Mhm.
that is for you, because it's different for all of us.
As we're having this conversation, I'm realizing I'm like, this so much of what we're saying is so obvious to me. And I'm wondering if it
Mm,
would help to kind of back some things up for a second. Because what I witness happen over and over again is that, and this is why I care about entrepreneurship, right? Like, I don't care about entrepreneurship and small business ownership because I want to help people grow massive companies. That's never been my reason for being here. The reason why I care about it is because of the people who find their way into it. And typically, what
mm.
I find is that the people who find me in my work, so probably the people listening, hello, listener, probably you, are people who traditional work environments didn't work for them. For one reason or another, it feels really soul sucking to be in a traditional work environment. And there's so many reasons why that could be. And so many of us decided that if we could just work for ourselves, then we
Mhm.
wouldn't have to deal with all of these things that are coming up. And then what we find as we're working for ourselves actually, oh shit, like it's still there. Like the same things
Mhm.
kind of rear their heads. And one of the
Mhm.
things that rears its head is that we end up, I'm saying we because I know this is not just me at this point. I know from talking to so many business owners that this is a thing that so many of us do that, and it's totally understandable that we end up starting our own businesses and then we end up holding ourselves to the same kinds of expectations that our shittiest bosses did. We also find that so many of the things that we were craving probably pointed to something deeper than just that we wanted the freedom of working for ourselves, right? Like it pointed to some maybe deeper need. And just starting a business is actually not an easy fix.
No.
Not at all.
Not at all.
It's really hard. Anyway, so as I'm saying all of that, what's coming up for you? I kind of want to just like open the conversation there and see what thread you want to pull on.
Well, first of all, I feel seen and attacked, but in a good way. I mean, called out maybe is a better word. Because I can really personally relate as a business owner to what you're saying about, kind of being in these traditional work environments and the various things that just didn't work for me. And so, okay, let me step over here and start my own business as a way of like getting away from these things, and then finding those same things showing up maybe in a different way, but in my business. And so, yeah, there's this kind of parallel that I feel like you're highlighting about these ways that we maybe, again, try to kind of like sidestep the deeper work. And it's not that I'm not saying that as a criticism. Like, I think this is a really human thing to do.
Yeah. And also, I will say that like we're not going to change traditional work environments. Like, nor do I think that that's the labor that a lot of people who I work with, I would not advise them to try to invest their labor in changing their work setting. Get the fuck out of there. Like, I'm for it.
Right.
To be clear.
Totally. Yeah. Yes. But then it's that question of like, okay, when all that shit starts showing up again over here, now what? Now what?
What do we do? And so what I witness happen oftentimes, and this is kind of the reason why I had the other podcast that I used to have, which was called Transcend Your Dichotomy, for anybody who's new here. Hi. I started talking a lot about this concept of like how we start to feel like there's how we actually want to function and how we actually want to show up in the world. And then we have this other version of us that we're holding ourselves to, who we should be, what the responsible version of us would do. That part, that where we hold ourselves, just threw my pen, where we hold ourselves to that standard, to me is where we start actually replicating some of the things that we maybe learned somewhere along the way, right? And those patterns that are not actually working for us, I think, start to show up, and we start feeling that divide. And I'm wondering from you, I know that, so one of the things that I really wanted to talk to you about was this concept of mindful self-compassion. And it sounds like one of the tools that you're saying could kind of help with that, because I think that so much of the work is learning how to be with yourself, and then also be like building the capacity to be in the tension of understanding yourself and being with yourself and what you need, and also moving toward growth. Like it's so fucking like hard. It is so hard. And mindful self-compassion, it sounds like, is a tool that could be really helpful in that maybe we don't realize as part of what I think a lot of us are trying to learn when we go through some of the business programming that's out there from this kind of corner of, I'm going to say, the coaching space that is trying to teach us how to be with ourselves and be with our businesses at the same time, and maybe not getting to those root issues.
Yeah. I appreciate you bringing up mindful self-compassion. I definitely want to talk about that, but can I jump on something else that you said first?
Please.
So you used the word tension, and I'm so glad you did, because that's exactly what I was thinking of when you were talking about this kind of like desire that we have for ourselves, and then this kind of old way of operating, or the learned way of operating, the reinforced way of operating. And in my mind's eye, I just was picturing those two pulling, like, sort of like taffy or something, like pulling in opposite directions, and that tension that arises out of that pull. And I had a therapist many years ago who taught me that it's like from that tension that something new arises. It's from that tension where growth happens. And so it's, again, like, not the idea of trying to get around that tension. It's actually holding in that tension long enough for that new thing to emerge. And I think that's kind of what you're bringing up, mindful self-compassion. It's like, that gives us maybe an opportunity to learn how to hold that tension long enough. for that new
agree.
thing to emerge.
I agree. And I'm hearing you say that. And I'm like thinking about all of the times, honestly, just over the past month, week, maybe 24 hours, honestly, that I've been like, why is this so hard? Because I certainly have learned that, like, and of course, it comes up in business, but it's with everything, right? That really the thing that I'm interested in my life, like to me, one of the things that makes life worth living is like moving toward a different version of things that actually does feel supportive for me, that allows me to be who I actually am, but that also allows me to, I don't know, like survive and deal with some of the systems around me.
Yeah.
And right. And yeah, when you were saying it's from that tension that something new arises or that growth happens, it's like that's where we can imagine a different way of doing things. And that's where we don't actually have to choose between what we were told we had to do in that work environment that didn't work and just kind of throwing our hands up and being like, well, I'm not going to do any of that because that doesn't work for me. And I'm just going to follow what feels good in this moment, knowing that like the systems are not actually set up to reward that. Right? And so somewhere along, and also that like that's just a starting point, and we don't actually, most of us find after going down that road for a minute that actually that's not it either, right? We need to imagine like a new possibility, a new way forward. No one else is imagining it for us, so we have to do it. It only comes from being willing to sit in that tension, and it's really uncomfortable. And I think that this brings things full circle, and I wonder what you think about this. But I think that a lot of what I see people trying to do in their businesses is figure out a way to make that tension not exist.
Yeah.
Figure out a way to like give me the right answer for what I can do that isn't what I was told the right answer was, because I know that wasn't working for me, but give me the right answer of what I can do that will help me kind of help make this easier and simpler, and for me to not have to sit in this tension and discomfort.
Yeah. I mean, I know as a business owner myself that I am often find myself looking for that answer. I'm like, okay, if it's not that, how do I get around this in a different way? Absolutely. Because
Right.
it's so, like, to your point, it's so fucking uncomfortable to sit in that place of tension and that place of figuring it out. I think for yourself, like on
Yeah.
your own, maybe not on your own. I mean, we do this in community, but like figuring it out for yourself, which might probably looks different from the person
Totally.
next to you on either side of you, even if you have similar values, even if you have a similar business, your way is your way. And I mean, now my brain goes to, like, we're talking about like self-actualization, like we're talking about like fully moving into your full autonomy and authority and not looking to anybody else for answers.
Let's talk a bit about the mindful self-compassion piece, because this is something that I really want to get into with folks. And this is something that I think you're going to be speaking to a bit in Fruition in January. So for folks who are listening, who are like, oh, I need to go further down this road, or how do I sit in that tension? Where do you see mindful self-compassion coming into this as a tool to help people be with themselves and with their business at the same time, and the hard things that are coming up? And kind of, I see this almost as a way of breaking this cycle of just trying to find a way out of it and then finding
Yeah,
yourself right back in the same place. You know what I mean?
totally.
How do
Yes,
we make it like,
absolutely.
it's almost like a tool for making this into that spiral staircase versus just that feeling of going around in circles.
Yes, yes. I love that image too. Like, how do we shift this to that spiral staircase where there's growth, there's movement instead of just
Right.
a merry-go-round, right? So mindful self-compassion is I think of it as a course because there are two originators, Kristen Neff and Chris Germer, Kristen Neff is a mindful self-compassion. She's a self-compassion researcher, and Chris Germer is a clinical psychologist and a mindfulness practitioner. And the two of them connected to develop, out of her research and his clinical practice, to develop a course that is not a substitute for therapy, but it's an adjunct to therapy. I think of it as like a skills building course almost, where you're sort of introduced to mindfulness and you're introduced to compassion and the way the two sort of intertwine with each other. And then throughout the typical course is 8 weeks long. And throughout that course, you learn actual skills of how to bring, well, what self-compassion is, and then how to bring self-compassion to your experience in the moment when you're in exactly one of these kinds of situations we're talking about. There's two things that I think are really, really important to business owners. And I'm going to generalize a little bit here, disclaimer. I know all business owners are not the same, but I think a lot of business owners are maybe on the perfectionistic overachieving side, potentially, and possibly, actually, data suggests this as well, that there's a lot of neurodivergence with business owners. And so these two things are two of the most well-researched kind of areas that self-compassion serves as an anecdote to. And this is because
Mm.
these two things are often highly correlated with shame. Perfectionism and shame, neurodivergence and shame. And there's different reasons why, but there's a high correlation there. I'm going to pause because your face suggests aha, or some kind of moment happening.
You want to know that, okay, so somebody who is neurodivergent and is currently working through perfectionism in a big way. I was actually given a pass from my therapist last Tuesday to give my perfectionism journal a break because it came in on Sunday in the mail. And by Tuesday, when I saw my therapist, I was a good bit into it, taking a very perfectionist approach to trying to work through it and get it done and fixed. And was like, told her that I had been swearing at it and I felt personally attacked by it. And I kept opening it and answering a few questions and slamming it closed. And she was like, maybe take it easy on the journal. And I'm like, but you told me to get the journal and you told me that I had to, right. So as somebody who is very much a perfectionist and as I'm finding out more and more about myself, that this is like, so it's like one of the very first experiences that I can remember is being in that perfectionism as survival kind of places as like a very small kid. And is also neurodivergent. One of the first times that I ever went to therapy, my therapist was like, I want to get more into where all this shame is coming from. And I was like, what are you talking about? Shame? At the time, I had like listened to every podcast episode that Brene Brown ever did. I had like listened to the audio version of like so many of her books. I was like addicted to a person who was researching shame. And it never once dawned on me that that was actually going on for me. It was like, totally not on my radar. So that's why my face is doing that, because you're like explaining something to me where I'm like, wait a second, this is a thing that happens. And, we think we know ourselves. Anyways, that's what's coming up.
Yeah. Well, thank you for sharing that. I appreciate it very much. And
Yeah.
I think, I think so the shame piece is so central to these two experiences that you're sharing and that I can relate to too. I mean, absolutely.
Yeah.
I identify as a perfectionist and I'm neurodivergent. So, I have personal experience around these two pieces too. And the thing that self-compassion does is it asks us to treat ourselves the way we would treat a friend, to offer ourselves the same level of kindness and compassion that we would give a friend in the same situation. And when you're a perfectionist, again, I don't want to just focus on perfectionism because, that this isn't just about that issue, but because I do think it is so prevalent, not just for business owners, but just as a product of our society. When you're a perfectionist, you often start to think that I should exist in this world in a way that is, it's not human, right? It's perfect. Humans are naturally imperfect. And so we hold ourselves to these standards that are unattainable. And then when we don't attain them, we're hard on ourselves and we don't know how to be with ourselves in that discomfort of not attaining the standard that we think we have to attain. And so again, with self-compassion, we learn the skill of, okay, well, what would I say? What would I say to Brooke if she came to me and said XYZ is happening? Okay, I would be so kind and understanding to Brooke. And yet I'm over here criticizing the hell out of myself for this. So how can I start to bring that same level of grace and kindness to myself that I would offer Brooke, right? It sounds easy. It's not easy in practice.
So not easy.
It's
so not easy.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And I'm wondering, there's like so many things that are coming up for me. The first thing is, as I am myself working on untangling this perfectionism, what the first thing that I realized was that I'm ashamed of being alive. Julia, that's
Yeah.
rude. I'm
Yeah.
like, I'm ashamed of being in a human form.
Yeah.
The fact that I'm a human being, like that in
Mm-hmm.
itself is like I should not exist as a human being. I should be, my therapist was calling me fairy Jesus, that I should be like this little fairy that operates as Jesus. Like that's like
Love
the,
your therapist, by the way. These are great.
yeah, she's
So
awesome.
great.
That
It sounds great.
that's the standard that I hold myself to, right? So as you're saying that, it's just, I just want to say like I'm hearing what you're saying is like kind of mind blowing to me, because it took me however many years to get to that point of recognizing that myself. Is there a link, do you think, between neurodivergence and perfectionism, that as somebody who's neurodivergent, perfectionism would become a thing that you would look to as like a way of kind of learning how to survive in a neurotypical environment?
Yeah, I think so. I can't point to any data to support that. I don't know the research on that, but I think sort of from my own experience and from my clinical work, I can say that that absolutely seems like a logical connection, that
Yeah.
perfectionism can develop as a coping mechanism, really, for
Yeah.
being neurodivergent in a neurotypical world.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And I would think also like, okay, so we're talking a lot about neurodivergence, but I think also like about people who in other ways, dominant culture is not on their side.
Yes, I'm so glad you're bringing that in. Absolutely. Because yes, we're talking about neurodivergence, but we're talking about people who are just sort of not in that big center kind of,
Right.
you think of the bell curve, that sort of
Right.
mainstream. And I think, yeah, absolutely. Perfectionism, it makes sense to me that perfectionism could develop out of being on those extremes.
Being marginalized in some way.
Marginalized. Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Uh-huh. And then the shame that comes with perfectionism and or the shame that can come with being marginalized, right?
Yeah.
Because that's another layer.
Shit, Kristen. Fuck. I'm like, I had such a plan for this conversation, and now what's happening is I'm just like processing in real time. I'm like, yeah, of course, people who are marginalized are going to be feel ashamed of existing and hold themselves to a standard of not being human. Of course, of course.
Of course.
And probably I've listened to 17 podcast episodes on this exact topic where this has been explained to me. And right now it is finally making sense in my body. Hi, everybody. This is me processing in real time. Okay. So mindful self-compassion, if we're coming back to this,
Yes.
first thing that I want to say is, as you were talking about treating yourself the way that you would treat a friend, one of the things that also came up for me is like, how about this concept of like, when we are in that traditional work environment and we see the way that management or whatever treats people, and we think, oh, well, if I were in charge, I would do these things, right? And then you start running your own business and you are like a bigger asshole to yourself than your boss ever was. This is what I witness happen, like perfectionism, right? So
Yeah.
suddenly we're back in that, oh, but when it's for me, I don't actually behave that way.
Yeah.
When it's toward me, I actually hold myself to a completely inhuman standard.
Yep. Yeah.
And so anybody who's like, oh, I'm actually not a very good boss to myself. Hi, mindful self-compassion is for you. At least I think. Does that feel fair?
Yeah. Absolutely. Yes,
Yeah.
without a doubt. Because then if you have the opportunity to develop those skills to be with yourself in a more compassionate way, then you can start being the boss to yourself that you wish you had instead of
Right.
a bigger asshole than the one you actually had. Totally.
Right.
Totally.
And
Totally.
I think it points you in the direction of actual growth opportunities versus what the story or the narrative that you're very used to functioning on, which is like this, you shouldn't even be a human being. Why is this so hard for you? Right? Like perfectionism is going to always, in my experience, point you toward try harder, be better, push through.
Do more. Yeah.
Mindful self-compassion to me allows us to look at ourselves, I would think, and be like, oh no, here's what's actually going on here. And the actual place, the actual opportunity for growth is in this thing, not in that I should just be less human.
Mm-hmm. Yes. And I'm so glad you're bringing that up because it points to a really important component of mindful self-compassion, which is one of the things we teach, I think, for a couple of weeks throughout the course. And this is common humanity. It's like it's a pillar of mindful self-compassion. And what common humanity says is that like this is a common human experience. So what I'm experiencing, even though I'm telling myself I shouldn't be experiencing it, pretty much anyone in this situation would be experiencing the same thing. And so I'm actually connected to others. I can be kind to myself because this is what it means to be human rather than, again, how do I push myself through this and avoid this common human experience, avoid this discomfort that is natural in this situation.
Ah, Kristen, I'm groaning in irritation with the fact that it's not just as easy as just pushing through it and avoiding. Would it be helpful to talk about some of the other pillars of mindful self-compassion?
So the three pillars of mindful self-compassion are mindfulness, self-kindness, and common humanity. So, and I'll just sort of say a quick thing about each piece. We get into it so much more as you learn the skills in the course, but mindfulness is important is like one of the pillars because what it does is allows us the distance. It allows us this observance opportunity. So it allows us some space between what's happening and what our mind is basically telling us to observe that there's something happening, right? So we
Yeah,
have to be aware that there's something happening before we can do something about it. Practicing and learning how to be mindful gives us that skill to
right.
observe what's happening in the moment.
So, for example, it might be mindfulness would probably be the thing that would allow us to go, oh, this is actually perfectionism
Mm-hmm.
that's showing up right now. I'm
Mm-hmm.
expecting myself to reach the standard that's actually not human.
Exactly. There's an example that I often use, like, because sometimes it's easier to think about towards someone else, right?
Yes.
So, if you are walking down the street and there's someone who has injured themselves and they're on the sidewalk and they've fallen, you have to have the presence of mind to be aware enough to notice that there's someone on the sidewalk who's injured before you can do something to offer support or to
Yeah.
take action to be kind.
Yeah.
And so that's, again, a kind of a different way of exemplifying like what the mindfulness piece is important about. We
Right.
have to be present enough to notice that there's something happening.
Yeah.
And then self-kindness is a little bit more self-explanatory. We are much more skilled, most of us are much more skilled naturally at being kind to others. So you see that person on the sidewalk and maybe the kind act is to go over and see, are you okay? Do you need something, right?
Right.
So self-kindness is that developing that skill of like, okay, what do I need in this moment?
Mhm.
For your example, like, oh, I'm noticing that maybe this is perfectionism. What do I need in this moment? What would I do for a friend? What would I offer someone else that's of that spirit of kindness?
Mhm. Mhm.
And then common humanity is kind of what I was just saying a moment ago about this idea of anybody in this situation would be experiencing this kind of feeling. And can I make can I instead be connected to others through this experience rather than self-shaming and self-isolating, thinking
Mm.
that, oh, this is just something wrong with me.
Right.
So we kind of weave those three things in together, and that's where we get mindful self-compassion.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm thinking about this piece of how we are connected to other people through this common humanity piece in this business context, because what I watch so many people
Mm,
do is they get the mindfulness piece where they start recognizing patterns or recognizing that they're doing a thing. They start to think about maybe the self-kindness piece,
mm-hmm,
what they need, and then
mm-hmm,
they feel like they should hide that from people.
mm.
Like in a, okay,
Aw.
do you know what I mean? Like in a,
Yeah.
okay, I'm
Oh, that
witnessing what
really
I
touched my heart. Yeah.
need, and
Mm-hmm,
if I, but also I need to balance this with my external appearance of my
mm-hmm,
business and how I function. And I need to look
mm-hmm,
like I have everything together. And I'm wondering about, I don't know, but as you're bringing
mm-hmm,
this up, what's happening in my brain right now is I'm thinking about how we might be able to use that common humanity piece as a thing to sort of close the loop on this and help some of that friction that arises in the I'm witnessing myself, I know what I need, and everyone's going to think this about me if I give myself that.
Totally. Yeah. I mean, I'm thinking about just an example from my own life of like last year I took some time off because I needed a break, but there was a whole thing around like, what's the perception? Like, what are other people going to think about
Yeah.
me doing this thing that was the self-compassionate thing to do? But it's like that I wanted to avoid it because of, I think, the piece that you're bringing up. Like, what are other people going to think if I actually do the thing that is the self-compassionate thing?
Right.
And I love this question you're posing of like, how does common humanity fold into that? It's such a good question, Brooke. I think common humanity invites us to really, really look at our, I mean, it feels redundant to say, but really, really look at ourselves as human and give
Mhm.
ourselves that permission to not live up to the expectations that we think other people hold, to not live up to these false ideals.
I think that one of the things that I'm realizing too is, and you know this because we've worked together before, but I talk
Mm-hmm,
all the time about how we find ourselves teaching the things that we need to learn so
mm-hmm,
often. And so for a lot of the people that I work with, especially people who work in a coaching kind of context, what I notice is some of the biggest growth opportunities, probably the biggest growth opportunities, come about when folks recognize that this is an opportunity to live their work.
mm-hmm,
So don't not just teach it to other people, not just say that
mm-hmm,
it's true, not just make quote cards about it and put it on your
mm-hmm,
Instagram, but when it comes down to it, to actually give yourself the gift of allowing it for yourself,
mm-hmm,
and practicing that and being in the tension that naturally arises when you
mm-hmm.
say, I trust in what I'm putting forward as my work in the world enough that I'm going to actually do it.
I'm
And
gonna
I
live it.
want, and I think that it comes up a lot when folks are doing these first two pillars.
Mm-hmm.
This is me working as we're this is me working this out as we're talking, but
Yeah.
it's like, right, it's like noticing the pattern, it's the being kind to yourself. I think the common humanity piece might be in this. So many other people are also experiencing what I am experiencing in this moment, and this is an opportunity to sort of be brave enough to show people. So
Mm-hmm.
it's leadership.
It's leadership. I was just thinking that as you were saying it. Yep. Mm-hmm. The common humanity piece is recognizing that I'm not the only one in the world who is having this experience. It's kind of a little bit uncomfortable because it's like an awareness of like, okay, I'm not special. I'm not the only one who is feeling this way in this type of a situation. The leadership, I think, is the next piece, and that thing. So I'm gonna actually take care of myself and let that be okay. I'm not gonna hide it.
And it's so fucking disruptive
Yeah,
to
absolutely.
the way that most people live their lives to do that. Like to,
Mm-hmm.
yeah. So, okay, so you're going to be teaching a bit in Fruition in January
Mm-hmm.
about this concept. So for folks who are listening who are like, oh shit, like me, come and join us and we'll
Yeah.
go a little bit more in depth together. Is there anything more that you want to make sure that we maybe didn't touch on that you really wanted to make sure people hear from you today?
I guess I'm curious for you as
Mm,
a business coach,
mm.
where do you see the value in having a business coach and a therapist?
Oh
Because,
yeah.
yeah, can you
Oh,
tell me that? Because I
oh
get this
yeah,
question
easy.
sometimes. Yeah. Okay. Tell me.
To me, my role as a business coach is to help people understand what parts of help people kind of parse out like what is an actual business and strategy issue
Hmm.
that can be solved through some sort of shift in the business. And then
Hmm.
what is coming from an internal thing and is deeper, and to sort of help point people in the right direction. For the most part, on doing the work that it's going to take to shift those patterns is not really my skill set. I can hold
Hmm.
space for people to talk about what's going on for them and reflect it back to them, but you're
Hmm.
going to have to take that somewhere else
Yeah. Right.
to really
Okay.
address it, right? So it's
Hmm.
really common that I find that so for example, like money stories come up all the time, right? So someone might
Hmm.
come to me and say, I want to get my business to this point where I'm making this much money. And then we start looking at, okay, what services do you want to offer? What's your pricing like? What's your capacity? Let's do the math. Either you're going to have to charge more,
Hmm.
or you're going to have to work more, or we're going
Hmm.
to have to change the structure of your business or the way that the offers work, or set up a different business model, whatever it might be, right? And ultimately what we end up getting to is the work that really needs to be done is very uncomfortable because there's a story there around money, around worthiness, around what you're able to ask for, around if you make that much money, what does it mean about you? Are you abandoning the people who need you most? What are the people in your, about out earning your parents? Out earning parents is like a huge thing, right? Great. Now we know some of the threads to pull, and you can now actually address this problem by going and dealing with that instead of running around in circles trying to change your business over and over again and push harder.
Yeah.
And then wondering what's wrong with you, that you're doing all of the things right and you're still not getting your business to the point that it needs to go, right? It's like a coach, a business coach, I think, depending on the type of coach, I mean, that you work with, I think in its best, in the best that we can offer is to help folks get more clear on what's actually going on in the business and parse out like, what's a systems and strategy issue? What's an implementation issue? What's an issue to address in the business? And then what's an issue to address in yourself? You need to have a place to actually address that stuff in yourself though, because just knowing that it's a pattern and then listening to podcast episodes is not going to do it.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that's what most people try to do.
Right. Right. I appreciate that so much. It makes me think about something I've just been kind of chewing on kind of as we've been leading up to this conversation, which is this real kind of, I think, idea that when you're an entrepreneur, when you're a business owner, that relationship that exists, that you're in relationship with your business. And so the same way that interpersonal relationships, family relationships, any kind of relationships kind of illuminate deeper issues for us or illuminate problem areas or stuck points or cycles, the business does the same thing. And I think that's what you're saying. Like business coaching actually kind of maybe unintentionally helps to shine a light on some of these things that then you can kind of take to therapy and say, okay, I need to dig in here. And then hopefully you have some self-compassion skills to hold you and support you through therapy.
Yeah. Or to, at the very least, notice some of those things that are coming up for as maybe a pattern, or as maybe something that has a deeper root to explore elsewhere, and notice that and sit with it long enough to, oh my gosh, I almost just quoted fucking Haley Williams. How classic. Because I'm obsessed with Haley Williams. Hi, everybody. Paramore. Hi. Sit still long enough to listen to yourself. Like sit with it long enough to have some understanding about what it actually is.
Yeah.
Right. I think about like, your parents barging in and when you're a kid and telling you like, why are you doing this? We've talked about this a bunch of times. Right. And you so badly want to be like, because of this is what's actually going on. Let me explain myself to you. Right. And I think, and not having the opportunity to do that, to me, mindful self-compassion, or at least what you've explained about it so far, or the self-kindness piece of it, I guess, can be that thing that allows you to sit there long enough to be curious about it. Just be curious about it and where it's coming up and have a little bit more understanding. And then that's going to point you in the right direction of what you actually have to do next, and maybe it's therapy, and it probably is, everybody.
Oh, I appreciate you so much.
Kristen, this is so fun. I'm really glad we finally did this, and I am so excited for you to teach this in Fruition in January. It's so needed, and I'm just really grateful to have you be a part of it.
Thank you, Brooke. I'm grateful for everything you do and for the opportunity to have this conversation and to teach in January. It's going to be a good time.
Yeah.
As good as learning self-compassion can be.
It'll be good. We'll do it together. It's the kind of
good
discomfort that hopefully, if you're listening, you're willing to be in with us. The good kind of discomfort.
Yeah. Join us.